When the notes above the sea turned red, by the 3rd month I had been working as a night nanny in Blackwater House, I thought. I had already seen every shape that exhaustion could take. I had learned the exact weight of 6-month-old Alma when she slept against my shoulder, the difference between her hungry cry and her lonely cry, the way the old pipes in the nursery walls shivered. Whenever the wind came in from the harbor, I had even learned how to warm milk with one hand while answering a business call, from downstairs with the other, because in that house every servant was expected to do 2 jobs and apologize for not doing 3. So when I looked up from Alma's crib and saw a line of glowing words hanging above the room, I assumed I had finally cracked. Poor baby. She still does not know her. Father is about to walk into the sea. What father? What sea? I blinked hard. The words stayed there, drifting gently over the mobile of wooden stars like they belonged to the room more than I did. The villain's route has reached its final page. The shipbuilder loses everything, leaves the child to relatives, and drowns. Before dawn, I rubbed my eyes so fiercely that Alma stirred and sighed in her sleep. The nursery lamp hummed, the curtains breathed. With the storm wind, the words remained, the child will be raised badly. The mother will not come back. The rival will take the patents and the harbor contract. Tragic, but necessary. My first clear thought was not about destiny or stories or invisible audiences watching from nowhere. My first clear thought was, he still has not paid me the rest of this month's wages. I threw the folded blanket aside, scooped Alma into my arms, and ran. Blackwater House had once belonged to a family that built rescue ships along the northern coast. Even bankrupt, it looked grand in the sort of way that made ordinary people straighten their backs and lower their voices. There were tall windows, polished dark, wood oil paintings of storm gray seas, and staircases wide enough for a horse to turn around on. But for 3 weeks, the grandeur had been peeling away in strips. First, the chauffeur disappeared. Then the cook. Then the second accountant. One, mourning the silver frames in the West Hall, were gone, their pale outlines hanging on the wallpaper like ghosts. I had only stayed because Alma was too young for that kind of collapse, and because the contract I had signed promised a completion bonus large enough to send money home to my mother and pay my younger brother's school fees for a year. If Lucian Vale died tonight, I would be left holding a baby, a suitcase, and a debt no one else would ever admit existed. The comments swam ahead of me as I ran down the corridor. Hurry up, Nanny. He is already in the boathouse. He wrote a note and everything. Such a waste of a face. The boathouse sat at the bottom of the cliff garden where the stone path turned. Slick with salt, rain lashed the windows. The harbor beyond was black and restless, each wave smashing white against the pilings. I shoved the door open with my shoulder. Lucian Vale stood on the end of the dock. Inside, coat soaked from the spray blowing. In through the open bay, he had tied a length of rope to one of the beam hooks. Above the maintenance platform, not a neat noose, nothing dramatic, just a working knot, the sort used to secure weight. Beside him lay a folded sheet of paper held down by a wrench. He turned at the crash of the door, and I saw at once that the comments had not exaggerated one thing. The man looked emptied out from the inside. He had always been too sharp-boned to count as handsome in the easy way, but now his face looked carved from old sleep, deprivation, and stubborn grief. He had not shaved. The cuff of his shirt was torn. He stared at me as if I were something conjured by the storm.
Do not do anything, he said hoarsely. Go back upstairs.
Pay my wages first, I shouted. It was not the speech that heroic women in stories probably gave. It was, however, the truth. He blinked. I marched onto the dock, Alma bundled against my chest and blinking in. Confusion. You owe me 8 weeks of salary, plus the completion clause, plus reimbursement. For the formula I bought with my own money, when your household accounts froze, if you are planning to die, you settle with creditors before departure. I do not know whether it was my tone, the baby in my arms, or the sheer absurdity of a nanny storming into a suicide that did it, but something on his face cracked, not into tears. Lucian Vale looked like the kind of man who would rather swallow nails, but the blank, terminal resolve in him faltered. Behind him, the comments exploded with delighted chaos. This is not the scene from the novel. She really opened with money. I love her. Lucian looked down at the rope, then at me, then at Alma, whose fist had emerged from the blanket and was waving through the damp air like a tiny sea creature. She is awake, he asked stupidly.
Yes, I snapped.
Your daughter tends to wake when her father decides to make disastrous life choices in a boathouse. The rain pounded harder. Somewhere behind us, lightning rolled over the bay. For a few terrible seconds, I thought he might turn away from us and step off the dock. Anyway, instead, he bent, picked up the note, crushed it in his fist, and sat heavily on the edge of the maintenance platform as if his knees had forgotten how to hold him. I do not have cash, he said after a long silence. Write an acknowledgement of debt. He let out a laugh so jagged it barely counted. You came in here and turned my final act into paperwork. I was not hired to lose my professionalism because you lost yours. That made him lift his eyes to me properly. For the first time. Perhaps until then I had only been the nanny, a pair of capable hands moving through the edges of his
Ruined house.
But I had not gotten this far in life by remaining scenery. My father had died when I was 19. My mother still sold steamed buns before dawn in a market that smelled of onions and wet cardboard. I had left nursing school halfway through because debt did not care about my dreams. I had taken care of newborns in 12 homes, old men in 3, and a woman recovering from spinal surgery who bit anyone who turned her too slowly. I knew exactly what desperation looked like, and I hated it most when it tried to dress itself as nobility. Fine, he said. I found a dry ledger page on a workbench. He wrote with the grease pencil used for inventory labels because the boathouse was the only place in the estate that still kept honest tools. I dictated. He signed. I made him include the amount. I made him include a promise to provide safe housing. For Alma, I made him date it.
Witness, he asked.
I shifted Alma higher on my shoulder. She can witness. She is the interested party. That almost made him smile, which was so out of place on his face that for a second, the storm seemed to hesitate. The comments drifted lower, softer. The script is moving sideways. Maybe tonight changes things. Please let it change things. I lowered myself onto an overturned crate, suddenly aware that my heart was beating all the way up in my throat. Good. Now that you are temporarily alive, we need practical decisions. If this estate is taken, where are we? Sleeping tomorrow, his answer came too quickly. I have an apartment over the old signal office by the East Pier. I bought it under Alma's
name before
everything became visible to the bank. It is legal. Small, furnished. Before everything became visible to the bank. That was a sentence made by someone who had been drowning a long time. Then we move there tomorrow, I said. And tonight, you're not left alone. He looked at Alma again. Rainwater dripped from his hair onto his wrists. I have never even changed her properly. Then your education begins at dawn. He rubbed both hands over his face. Miss Marin Hale. Miss Hale, he said, voice frayed.
Why?
Are you doing this? I wanted to say because the floating words in the air told me if I did not, you would
Die and leave me holding the consequences.
I wanted to say because stories that destroy servants first and call it fate have always offended me. I wanted to say because something about Alma's round sleeping face made me irrationally unwilling to let the world crush everything around her before she could crawl. Instead, I said, because if you die, it becomes my problem. That time he did smile, just once, and it was the loneliest smile I had ever seen. We moved the next afternoon. The apartment over the old signal office was reached by an outside iron staircase that overlooked the eastern harbor. Below, the abandoned office still held peeling maps, rusted lockers, and a board of signal flags sun faded into ghosts of color. Above, the apartment had 2 rooms, a kitchen hardly big enough for one person to turn in and windows facing the water. On both sides, it smelled faintly of cedar and old paint. To me, it smelled like survival. I opened every window, scrubbed the counters, laid towels in the drawers, and turned the spare room into a nursery with the efficiency of panic. Lucian carried boxes up the stairs in silence. What the repossession team had left in Blackwater House fit into 12 boxes, a cradle, a folding cot, 1 trunk of design files he would not let out of his sight, and a single seaman's chest full of Alma's things. There was no grand piano, no sculpture, no heirloom china, ruin, once finished, always turned out to be smaller than people expected. By nightfall, the apartment looked almost
cheerful.
I had pinned paper stars above Alma's crib. A kettle whistled. The harbor, lights blinked in long patient lines beyond the glass. I stood in the kitchen stirring rice, porridge, when I noticed Lucian had gone unnaturally still in the doorway. He was looking around as if he had stumbled into a memory he had no right to touch. This place, he said after a while, has never looked like this. It looks lived in. I had forgotten that was possible. The comments were back, quiet and thin as threads. No one has made him a home before. Do not romanticize basic domestic competence, but also, I might cry. He deserved better than his script. I ignored them and handed him a bowl.
Eat.
Then bathe, then learn how to hold your daughter without looking like she is an unstable engineering model. He obeyed so automatically that I wondered when anyone had last given him orders for his own good. The first week in the apartment nearly killed us all in smaller ways than the boathouse would have. Lucian discovered that babies had no respect for speeches, schedules, or existential despair. Alma urinated through 3 changes of clothes in one day, vomited down his clean shirt twice, and somehow managed to get mashed pumpkin into his hair, although he was not the one eating. He walked the floor at 2 in the morning with the wild-eyed concentration of a man diffusing explosives. Once I woke to find him standing in the nursery doorway, hand raised to knock, frozen there by pride and uncertainty. While Alma wailed behind me, "Come in," I muttered. "I can handle it." "Then why are you haunting my doorway, like a guilty ancestor?" He came in. For a month we lived on borrowed order. He sold his watch. I took on 2 daytime shifts with a neighbor who needed help caring for her mother after a stroke. We split formula costs from the advertisement revenue of exactly nothing, because at that point there was no plan. Besides surviving the week, Lucian worked through stacks of papers. Every night, old invoices, contracts, drafts of ship designs, legal notices. Sometimes I caught him staring at one page. For 10 full minutes, jaw tight, eyes far away. Other nights he sat at the kitchen table, sketching low-cost storm barriers on the backs of rejected loan forms. The comments did not appear all the time. They came in flashes when something threatened to harden into the old shape of the story. At first, they terrified me. Then I began reading them the way one reads weather. This is where the rival buys the dry dock. At auction, he still does not know the chief. Accountant copied the maintenance logs. The blue notebook is in the false bottom of the seaman's chest. That last one made me stop mid-laundry. The seaman's chest belonged to Lucian's grandfather. It was oak banded in, tarnished brass, and so heavy that even empty, it took both of us to drag it away from the wall. Lucian frowned while I knelt beside it.
What are you doing?
Looking for someone's bad conscience. The false bottom took 10 minutes to find, and 2 more to pry up without breaking. Beneath it lay a blue oilskin notebook, sealed in waxed cloth. Lucian went so still I thought the air had left the room. He knew the notebook before he opened it.
I could tell.
Inside were copied maintenance records. From the ferry, Lucian had been blamed for sinking the previous winter. Publicly, the tragedy had ended him. 3 workers dead, 15 injured. A night crossing in sleet, hull failure, of media storm, and then the useful revelation that Lucian Vale had warned against a design alteration but signed the final budget anyway. His investors withdrew. His rivals circled. His wife, who had already been halfway out the door, finished leaving. The notebook showed something else. The steel in the altered ballast tanks had come through a shell supplier linked to Basil Thorne, Lucian's business rival and Corinne's new patron.
Inspection.
Signatures had been duplicated. A series of emergency repairs had been quietly removed from the official maintenance archive before the inquiry. Lucian sat down very slowly. "I thought Elias kept all this," he said. "Elias." My chief accountant. He vanished 3 days after the inquiry closed. The comments shimmered. He did not vanish. He ran. He is in Marsh End under a false surname. Teaching arithmetic at a parish school. Look harder. I was no longer frightened by how impossible everything had become. Impossible had utility. I leaned on the table and said, "Then we find Elias." Lucian laughed once without humor. "You? Say that like people are misplaced." Receipts. I say it like men who destroy lives rarely bother inventing good hiding places. For the people they paid badly, that was how our war truly began. We did not rebuild through sentiment. We rebuilt through lists. I made categories on lined paper. Evidence, money, witnesses, leverage, risk. Lucian made calls to former yard workers who still trusted him enough to pick up. I went through public records in the municipal archive and learned exactly how. Often companies rename themselves to escape their own guilt. We sold the last of the silver cutlery to buy train tickets to Marshend, where Elias Ashburn turned out indeed to be, alive, ashamed, and teaching long division to 12-year-olds under the name Eli Brown. He was so startled to see Lucian on the school steps that he nearly dropped his stack of copybooks. "I was going to come back," he said after. "We got him into a tea shop and out of the rain. I swear I was. But they followed me. For months, Basil's people. I thought if I surfaced, they would bury
Me with the rest of it.
Lucian did not shout. That frightened Elias more than shouting would have. He merely laid the blue notebook on the table between them and said, "You owe the dead more than silence." Elias began to cry, not elegantly. He cried like a man whose fear had rotted into his bones. When he could speak, he gave us names, dates, a storage unit number, and a memory stick he had hidden inside the lining of an old suitcase because he had once intended to send it to a journalist, but lacked the courage. On the train back, Lucian stared out the window while the fields blurred gray and gold. "In the original version of things, I said carefully, did you ever imagine yourself fighting this hard?" He looked at me. Original version, I should not have said it that way. But the rhythm of the comments had seeped into me, and some part of me was tired of pretending the world was ordinary when it had long ago given up that privilege. I covered badly. "I mean before." "Before? The boathouse?" His mouth thinned. "No. Before the boathouse, I was only trying to stop hurting." That answer stayed with me for days. Corinne arrived a week later. She did not knock. One moment, I was mashing pear for Alma in the kitchen. The next, the door opened and a woman in a cream coat stood in the entryway with a kind of composure that had once probably made rooms reorganize themselves around her. She was beautiful in a deliberate, expensive way, the exact cut of her hair, the exact shade of lipstick, the exact expression of injured righteousness. The comments went feral. "The mother returns. Do not let her near the baby. Remember, she comes for the trust, not the child." Corinne's gaze skimmed over me with professionally insulted confusion, and "You are still here." "Yes," I said. "Children require continuity. I came for Alma." Lucian had been out at the pier speaking to a retired welder about renting workshop space. That left only me, the baby, and the woman, who had once walked away from both father and child because a brighter orbit had opened elsewhere. I wiped my hands and stood.
On what
basis? She gave me a hard smile. "On the basis that I am her mother." "In that case," I said, "you may explain."
Why? You did not call for 4 months.
Her face tightened by a fraction. "My private life is not your concern." "Correct. But the child's welfare is." She stepped farther into the apartment, heels tapping once on the wood floor. Alma, from her play mat, looked up with open curiosity and then returned to chewing on the ear of a stuffed rabbit. Corinne's eyes flickered toward her and away. It was quick enough that if I had not been watching, I would have missed it. "No recognition," said the comments above.
Us.
"Not even instinct."
She hates what?
"Babies due to mirrors." Corinne lifted her chin. "I am willing to be generous. Lucian can continue seeing her. I merely think the current arrangement is unhealthy because, she said, and now the real emotion entered her voice, cold and acidic. "He drags everything he touches into ruin. The company was one thing. I will not have Alma turned into a pity prop for his failures." The spoon in my hand bent slightly under my grip. "She is not a prop," I said. "And if you plan to discuss this, you will do it without insulting the person who wakes with her 3 times a night, meaning you, meaning all of us, unfortunately." Corinne looked around the apartment as if the walls themselves offended her. You are overstepping. I tolerated your presence when you were merely staff.
Do.
Not confuse that with status. That was when Lucian came in. He took one look at Corinne standing near Alma and stopped so abruptly that the toolbox in his hand hit the wall. I called you months ago, he said.
When?
She had the fever. Corinne turned. And I am here now.
For what?
A beat passed. The bay light behind him flattened his face into angles. The comments drifted lower, almost eager. Ask about the trust. Ask about the insurance. Ask why Basil suddenly cares. About nursery reports? He did not ask any of those things. Not. Yet, Lucian had spent too many years loving a person who only recognized a leverage as affection. But he was no longer the man from the boathouse. For what? He repeated. Corinne's mouth shifted, and I saw it. Then the calculation of whether softness would work. She changed tack instantly, eyes glossing with grief. I made mistakes, she said. I panicked. Everything was collapsing, Basil said. Lucian held up a hand. Do not bring him into this house.
Interesting, whispered the comments.
He did not ask what Basil said. He already knows. Corinne saw it too, whatever had changed in him. Her performance faltered. You think you can keep her from me? I think he said that if you wish to discuss Alma's future, you may do so. Through counsel, her eyes snapped to me then as if I were the source of the contamination. You put those words in his mouth. No, I said. He finally discovered he has one. She left without looking at Alma again. That night, Lucian stood at the sink, washing bottles while rain rattled the panes. She used to say my worst quality was that I believed warnings came from
Love, he said.
And now, he dried his hands slowly.
Now, I think
Some warnings come from people who are tired of cleaning up blood. I pretended not to understand the compliment because it was easier that way. Money remained a problem. Evidence or not, you cannot feed a child on righteous indignation. Lucian's former workshop had been auctioned. Most of his tools were gone. The harbor board had frozen his remaining company accounts, so while Elias worked with a lawyer to prepare sworn testimony and while I assembled timelines dense enough to choke a horse, we still needed bills paid. The answer came from the fishermen. Word traveled fast along a coast where weather could kill you faster than gossip. Men began coming to the signal office with cracked bilge pumps, bent prop shafts, leaky skiff hulls, and desperation. Sharpened by storm season, Lucian repaired the first engine at cost, because the owner had once worked a rescue boat that saved 4 children during the ice squalls of '98. The second he repaired because the widow who brought it looked too tired to bargain. By the 5th engine, I was keeping ledgers again. The East Pier workshop began almost accidentally. We rented half a shed from the welder. Lucian scavenged benches from the abandoned ferry yard. I scrubbed them, labeled drawers, and negotiated payment schedules with captains who had never in their lives been successfully billed on time. Alma spent her afternoons in a playpen by the office stove, supervised by whichever fisherwoman had the loudest opinions and the cleanest hands that day. She became, to my private horror, beloved by everyone. They did not bring us charity. They brought work. Lucian redesigned a modular storm baffle for small harbors that could be built with local steel and installed without a corporate contract. He rebuilt damage rescue skiffs for half what larger firms charged. I handled books, forms, orders in the municipal permit office, where one clerk attempted to flirt with me until I recited the relevant procedural statutes for inspection delays. After that, he processed our paperwork in absolute silence. The comments loved the workshop. This is better than the novel. Look at him.
Actually useful.
Look at her running operations like she was born with a ledger in one hand and a knife in the other. At first, I told myself all of this was temporary. I would collect what Lucian owed me. I would build savings. I would go back to school. That last desire had lived under my ribs. For so long, it had become almost shameful to name. Before debt, before childcare, before life. Narrowed into service work and survival. Math. I had wanted to study maritime law because my father had once been nearly killed in a dock accident that no one was ever held responsible for. I had liked the clean brutality of rules that could be sharpened into protection. But wanting something and being able to Walk toward it were different countries. Lucian must have noticed the brochures. I kept them in a stack beneath the accounts. Book, night programs, scholarship, deadlines, application essays. One evening after Alma had fallen asleep, sitting up and we had both laughed until she woke again and glared at us. He touched the corner of a brochure with one grease-smudged finger. You should apply, he said. I should pay electricity. Both are possible. Not in the month of October. He leaned back in the chair opposite mine. You once told me the world belongs to the people who write things down before others can rewrite them. I said that about invoices. I am applying it broadly. I smiled despite myself. Dangerous. Habit. He was serious, though.
Marin?
The way he said my name now was different. From the early days, less like a request, more like an understanding. You saved me because my death would have become your problem, he said. I know. But somewhere along the way, this stopped, being only about preventing disaster. You built something here. If you walk away from yourself after doing all this for us, I will consider it a
personal insult.
I stared at him across the little kitchen. Tea bowl while the kettle ticked on cooling. Metal. Outside, the harbor horn sounded, long and low through the fog. The comments floated above the lamp. Tell him she is terrified. Tell her he knows. Instead, I said, that is an extremely arrogant way to be encouraging. His mouth tilted. I have old habits too. The public inquiry opened 3 weeks before Christmas. By then, Basil Thorne had already begun to feel the tide turn. He went on television, twice spoke solemnly about innovation and resilience and described Lucian as a bitter man unable to accept market realities. Corinne gave an interview about parenting under difficult circumstances, despite not having parented anything more demanding than a potted orchid in recent memory. Then someone leaked photographs of me carrying Alma into the clinic during her autumn chest infection with the implication that I was the secret lover, poisoning a once respectable family. I was furious enough to become efficient. Elias's testimony, the memory stick, cross-checked material invoices, signal, office ledgers, Corinne's messages to Basil from the month before the ferry. Collapse. A storage unit full of removed ballast panels. I organized every document into labeled folders with color tabs. Then I drafted a custody chronology, so clinically thorough it made Lucian stop halfway through reading and ask, did you? Stab the paper first and write afterward. It saves time. The comments applauded. She was born for war. Someone give her a better printer. On the morning of the inquiry, snow fell. Over the harbor in fat, exhausted flakes, Alma stayed with Miri Sloan, the widow, from Pier 7, who trusted no one born. After 1985, but had, after extended negotiation, admitted that I was useful. Enough not to disgrace myself. Lucian and I walked into the hearing chamber carrying 3 boxes of files and the kind of calm that only comes after you have been too frightened for too long to remain frightened in the same way. Basil Thorne looked polished enough to sell morality in glass bottles. Corinne wore navy and pearls. Their lawyers smiled, like people accustomed to softer prey. Lucian took his seat. I sat behind counsel, with a notebook and 2 sharpened pencils. The comments assembled above the chamber, like storm birds. This is the chapter where he loses in the novel. Do not let the script close. The board chair began. Statements were made. Basil's counsel spoke first, painting a portrait of negligence, emotional instability, and opportunistic accusations invented to damage a successful competitor. Corinne's affidavit about Lucian's unsafe domestic conditions was read aloud with pained dignity. I wrote down every lie and numbered them. Then it was our turn. Our lawyer was excellent, but the moment that broke the room belonged to Lucian. He did not plead. He did not posture. He stood, placed one hand on the witness rail, and said in a voice so steady the snow seemed to pause against the windows, I am here because 15 people survived, long enough to tell us the boat should never have left dock, and because 3 people did not survive long enough to tell
us anything.
I signed the budget revision.
That part is
true.
But I signed a revision for marine grade steel rated to withstand winter. Crossing load, what was installed was something else. I know the difference because I designed the failure tolerances. Basil smiled faintly, expecting anger. What he got instead was proof. The inquiry ran 2 days. Elias testified, shaking so hard he had to grip the chair. The retired inspector admitted under oath that he had received consulting fees, routed through a shell company later, linked to Basil's operations director. I produced a chain of messages showing Corinne forwarding internal schedules. During the months she still had access to Blackwater House servers, a diver from the Coast Guard identified the swapped panels from the storage unit. By the time Basil's counsel demanded adjournment, the demand sounded less like confidence and more like panic. On the second afternoon, Corinne tried to salvage herself by invoking Alma. I had to protect my child, she said. Lucian was collapsing. The environment was unstable. That woman here, she pointed, directly at me, encouraged hostility and cut me off from my daughter. I stood before counsel could stop me. May I clarify one factual issue? I asked. The chair. There was an objection. The chair overruled it because at that point the room wanted clarity more than protocol. I placed the pediatric appointment record on the projector screen. Then another. Then another. These are the clinic visits. For Alma Vale from 6 weeks to 11 months. Respiratory infection, rash, weight, checks, vaccine follow-ups. Please note, emergency contacts. Please note who signed. Consent. Please note who attended. In the period when Ms. Corinne Vale claims she was being prevented from access, she did not once contact the clinic, request records, or inquire about treatment. If she wishes to discuss maternal concern, she may begin with the date of Alma's fever. We will wait. The room went so quiet I could hear a radiator hiss. The comments practically screamed. She ended her. I would like this woman to represent me in all hypothetical future disasters. Corinne did not answer. Basil was arrested 6 days later on fraud and corruption charges. 2 weeks after that, the Harbor Board issued its final finding clearing Lucian of direct negligence and referring the matter for criminal prosecution against multiple parties. The insurance freeze lifted. The dry dock sale was suspended pending review. The city, embarrassed and desperate to look civic-minded, invited proposals for low-cost coastal safety. Retrofits from independent firms. Lucian looked at the invitation, then at me. No, I said immediately. You do not get to hesitate on opportunities anymore. I am tired. He laughed, full and startled, the sound of a man whose lungs had finally realized they were not underwater. Corinne never lost all her elegance, but she lost everything else that mattered to her. The court granted Lucian primary custody, supervised visitation at his discretion, and a child support order that made her lawyer look physically ill. She walked out of the building with her back perfectly straight and no one waiting by the car. I almost pitied her. Almost. The workshop won the first city contract by March. It was not a fairy tale fortune. It was better. It was real money for real work. With signatures at the bottom, we expanded into 2 sheds and hired 4 men and 1 woman from the old rescue yards. Alma learned to toddle between stacks of rope and blueprint. Miri declared her stride good dock. Balance. Lucian pretended not to be moved. When Alma said "da" for the first time, while smacking a spoon against his knee, it did not escape me that my debt note remained folded inside the first page of the accounts ledger, now joined by a neat column of repayments. Lucian had paid me every overdue coin. He paid interest too, unasked. The day he handed me the last envelope, he looked almost wary.
So, he said,
This is where you leave. I turned the envelope over in my hand. The comments hovered, subdued, and watchful. No one would blame her. She owes him nothing. Say what you actually want this time. I took a breath. I sent my application in February. I said. He blinked. For the law program. Yes. And I was accepted. His face changed in stages, relief first. Then pride so bright it embarrassed him. Then something quieter and more difficult. When autumn. The bay wind pushed at the window. Downstairs someone laughed over the grind of a belt sander. Alma was asleep on the sofa beneath a blanket printed with whales. For one suspended moment the whole world seemed arranged around the answer to a question neither of us had known how to ask. And until autumn, he said. I was thinking, I said carefully, that I might stay through the summer. The Workshop can afford a proper operations. Manager now, but whoever you hire will.
Need training.
Also, Alma bites strangers when she is tired. She gets that from me. I noticed. He stepped closer. Not enough to corner. Just enough to be unmistakably there. And after autumn, I looked down the envelope again. Then, at the debt note still visible through. I found Ledger's warm page. No longer a threat, but a relic of the first night key. Chose it, chose no, chose not, close. After autumn, I said, I suspect you will continue paying me in arguments. The smile that broke over his face then was not lonely at all. Summer left slowly. We spent it teaching a new manager the difference between feasible work orders and glorious nonsense, repainting the nursery because Alma had discovered crayons and pretending my departure sat at a safe distance because calendars were polite liars. The comments appeared less and less. Perhaps there was less script to fight. Perhaps once people stepped hard enough. Outside the lines lost authority. Occasionally I still saw them over. Ordinary scenes, Alma asleep with one foot. Hanging through the crib rails, Lucian. Bent over a drafting table at midnight. My own face in the kitchen window when I stayed too late to call the school. Bursar's office. Look, they made a future. That was never supposed to happen here. At the end of August, the city gave Lucian the long-term harbor retrofit commission. The same week I received scholarship, confirmation that turned my acceptance. From dangerous hope into fact, we celebrated by eating fried clams from paper trays on the East Pier while Alma attempted to feed the gulls and instead fed her own shoes. On the morning I left, the harbor was bright enough to hurt. Miri came to the station to see me off and gave me a tin of biscuits for legal emergencies. Elias mailed a fountain pen with a note that read, in shaky handwriting, for the records only you will
Know how to keep.
Lucian carried my suitcase. Alma carried a stuffed rabbit by the ears and refused to release it when we boarded. The train platform smelled of coal dust and coffee. It was not the same as the platform where I had once left nursing school behind for debt and work and the slow humiliation of putting other people's futures ahead of my own, but my chest remembered the old ache. Anyway, Lucian stopped beside carriage 3. He did not make grand speeches. That was never his talent. I had a life before you, he said, but I did not know how to live in it. I laughed once because if I did not, I might cry in front of the entire platform. That is both romantic and badly phrased. I am out of practice.
You should workshop it.
I prefer field testing.
He glanced down at Alma, who had wrapped both arms around my leg. We will visit during the winter break, if that is permitted. It depends, I said solemnly.
Will you?
Bring better wording.
I will bring the child as leverage.
Corrupt. He looked at me for a long moment then, in the unguarded way of a man who had once been prepared to vanish and now stood, making plans months in advance. Marin, he said softly, there was a night when the sea had already made room.
For me?
You changed your mind and gave that room back to the tide. I do not know what language is large enough for that. I bent and kissed Alma's hair because it was easier than looking at him through the sudden heat in my eyes. Then do not try to thank me with language, I said. Use maintenance schedules. Eat regularly. Do not ignore legal mail. Raise your daughter so she bites the right people. He laughed, and this time I did cry a little. The comments gathered one final time above. The platform clear and bright as gulls in morning light.
No villain here.
No side character either. Only people who refused the ending handed to them. When the train began to move, Lucian lifted Alma so she could wave. She did it. With her whole body, crooked wrist, and
All.
he stood behind her, one hand steady on her small stomach, and watched until the platform thinned into distance. I sat back, opened my law reader to the first marked page, and looked out at the line where harbor met sky. For years I had believed life was something that happened to me while I did necessary work in the margins of other people's stories. A man nearly died. A child nearly became an orphan inside a plot built from convenience and cruelty. A woman who had trained herself to survive. By service and caution opened a door and found out the script could be argued with. It turned out she could be argued into something else too. By the time the coast had disappeared, behind rain and the train carried me, Inland, I was no one's nanny, no one's emergency substitute, no one's afterthought. I was still tired,
Still learning.
still carrying debt in old invisible shapes, but I was moving toward a future I had chosen with both hands, and for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. Winter arrived earlier inland than on the coast, all iron-colored mornings and library windows filmed with ice. The law program was harder than hunger and lonelier than any nursery shift I had ever worked. Half my classmates were 10 years younger. Some of them still had the soft confidence of people whose lives had not yet required negotiation with reality. I worked in the records office at night, annotated casebooks until my eyes blurred, and slept with 3 alarms because ambition, I discovered, had no interest in being convenient, and yet I was happy. Not the loud kind, not the kind other people could photograph, a harder, steadier thing, the kind that arrived when I opened a statute and understood its machinery, the kind that lived in the first essay I handed in without apologizing for my own,
Mind
the kind that came every Thursday evening when a parcel from the coast arrived with dried seaweed snacks for brain, maintenance, a child's drawing made, mostly of blue circles, and a note from Lucian written on workshop carbon paper, because he still never had proper stationery at hand. The notes in the air did not return. Not during lectures. Not in the library. Not even on the night I sat alone at the dormitory desk and realized I had gone an entire month without once imagining the boathouse rope. It was as if the world once forced into honesty had decided to stop narrating itself at me and let me do the work. Lucian visited at the beginning of winter. Break exactly as promised. He arrived with Alma wrapped in a red wool coat and carrying the stuffed rabbit. Upside down. She had grown absurdly. She no longer bit strangers on sight only. People she believed deserved correction. Lucian, seeing the tiny room I had rented near campus, said nothing for a long time. Then he put a bag of oranges on the table, looked at my stacks of books, and asked, very quietly, "Are you sleeping enough?" An illegal question. "I'm funding your next kettle if you..."
Lie.
It was snowing when we walked across the old stone bridge behind the law faculty. Alma demanded to be allowed to touch every railing, every bench, every drift of snow. Lucian followed with the patient vigilance of a father who had once nearly lost the right to be ordinary. I watched them from half a pace ahead and was struck by the strange fierceness of being wanted in a scene that did not require disaster to justify my presence. At the station that evening, before he left, Lucian reached into his coat and handed me a flat envelope. Inside was the original debt note from the boathouse, preserved between 2 pieces of stiff paper so it would not tear. "I think," he said, "this belongs to the woman who turned it into a life." I looked from the note to him. The winter lamps made his face gentler than the sea ever had.
And what if I still want to collect? I
asked. Then I am prepared for a very long repayment schedule. Alma, wedged between us, clapped for no reason except delight. I laughed. The sound rose white in the cold air. There on the platform, with the train breathing steam behind us and the old debt note warm from his pocket in my gloved hand, I finally understood that some endings did not close anything. They simply taught the future where to
Begin.
This time, when the whistle blew, no one looked like they were being left behind.